For almost 20 years, Women's Link has used the law in creative ways to successfully get justice for women and girls, making sure that the law is a tool for bringing them closer to justice and to lives that are free from violence and discrimination, and where they are fully autonomous over their bodies and choices. We are present in 4 regions in Central America and the Caribbean, South America, Europe, and East Africa. My name is Gema Fernández, and I am one of 4 managing attorneys at Women's Link. I'm based in Madrid, and I'm overseeing the organization's work in Europe. Today, our MC is Keina Yoshida, barrister at Doughty Street Chambers and research officer at the Center for Women, Peace and Security at the London School of Economics and Political Science. Many thanks, Keina, for being with us today, and the floor is yours now.
Thank you so much, Gema, and welcome everybody to this discussion today, this webinar on digital rights and sexual and reproductive rights. This is going to be a rich and very timely discussion, so I hope you're going to enjoy it. Before I introduce the speakers today, I just want to let you know some Zoom housekeeping. First is simultaneous translation is available. There's a little world sign at the bottom of your Zoom screen that says in English interpretation, and you can click that and pick the channel that you want. There's English, Spanish, or for those of you who are bilingual, you can click the sign that says original language. The format is that the speakers are all going to present, and then there's going to be a discussion. There is a Q&A function, again, at the bottom of your screens, where you can write your questions or leave resources that you'd like to share. And I'm also told that if you would like to speak and ask your question in person through your voice, you can indicate that you would like to do so, and we'll try and make that happen as well. As you will see, the session is being recorded. It's currently going out live on YouTube, and I understand it's going to be made available afterwards, so you can catch up on it again and share it with your colleagues. It's my real pleasure today to introduce you to our speakers, and I'm going to introduce them in the turn in which they will be speaking. And our first speaker today is Paulina Gutiérrez. Paulina is an international human rights lawyer, and she leads the global policy work on freedom of expression, gender, and non-discrimination in the organization Article 19. It's an international human rights organization that works in the protection and defense of freedom of expression across the world. And she has extensive experience working in strategic litigation at a national and regional level. And before joining Article 19's international office, she created the digital rights program in Article 19 Mexico and Central America, and led several initiatives on the intersection between gender equality and freedom of expression. And she's been working on all sorts of things, including recently on Article 19's new project on Equally Safe as well, that you can check out on their website. Our next speaker is Yaman Akdeniz, who is a professor of law at the Faculty of Law at the Istanbul Bilgi University, and he is one of the founders of İFÖD, the Freedom of Expression organization. Yaman has been working in the field of internet freedom since the mid-1990s, and he's successfully applied 3 times to the Constitutional Court to overturn access blocking decisions involving Twitter, YouTube, and Wikipedia platforms from Turkey as one of the users of these platforms. And he's also successfully challenged these together with colleagues in Turkey at the European Court of Human Rights with regards to the access of blocking of YouTube from Turkey. Our third speaker today is from Women's Link Worldwide. It's Aintzane Márquez. Aintzane is a senior attorney at Women's Link, where she engages in litigation before national courts in Spain, as well as regional and international bodies on subjects including gender-based violence against women, trafficking, and sexual and reproductive rights. Our last speaker today, last but certainly not least, is Venny Ala-Siurua. Venny is the director of Women on Web. It's an international online abortion service with almost 17 years of experience providing access to medical abortions to those with limited or restricted access. And before Women on Web, Venny worked on social and health protection programming in different geographical locations, including in India, Laos, Kosovo, and the Ukraine, and she is active in the global digital rights movement. I'm going to be handing it over to Paulina by first asking some questions, but before I do so, I just wanted to outline, broadly speaking, why this is such an important conversation that we're having right now. I think there has been a lot of discussion that's grown over the years on the different interactions between free speech and reproductive rights. I, for one, know during my university years, I was taught by someone called Ivana Bacik, who you might know in the European context from cases involving Ireland and access to information. And Ivana, as a student, was threatened with imprisonment for providing, as being part of a body of students providing information to women and girls in Ireland about where access to abortion could be obtained in the United Kingdom. And since then, we've seen other cases come before the European Court of Human Rights, as well as the European Court of Justice, on that access and importance of the right to information. So there was the Women on Web case, and Portugal, where Portugal decided to send warships out to meet women on web. Such was the threat that they felt from information providers. We've also seen then this intersection really with the growth of slap suits and reprisals against activists, lawyers, other people who are providing information simply on sexual and reproductive rights. But today we're going to be looking specifically at this digital turn and the way this affects, I think, the way structural inequalities play out in our physical lives, but also in that online space, which is growing ever part of our physical daily lives as well. And this is where I think we're going to get into two big topics today, which is this right to information and access information, and also the right to access affordable care as well, especially in terms of challenges like the pandemic. That is my brief overview. I'm really excited to learn more about digital rights. And I'm going to start with Paulina and ask you two questions, and they're very big questions. So I'm very sorry about the limited time, but very grateful that you'll be helping us to understand better. One, what are digital rights? And my follow-up question is, how are digital rights and sexual and reproductive rights connected? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Keina. I am super happy to share this space with you today, with everyone. It's a privilege to be next to all of you talking about this important topic. And particularly, as you have said, in terms of what is exactly digital rights and how they connect with sexual and reproductive rights. So the first and simple but very powerful answer would be that when we talk about digital rights, they are not different from the human rights that we know or that are widely recognized internationally and regionally. So the key connector between human rights and digital rights, aside from being used differently on a conceptual side of things, but when we talk about its content, its protection, and its scope, we talk about how human rights that we know are exercised through the use of technology, are exercised through the internet, or whenever we have access to technology and how is exactly that our rights are affected or protected when we use technology. So this is exactly when we talk about digital rights, what we are talking about. And that's why in Article 19, I mean, we use the term, but we also like to call it human rights exercised or through the use of technology, because it's important to remember that they are not different. But of course, whenever we start talking about technological developments, or whenever we try to identify some differentiators of how exactly are digital rights, human rights, of course, it becomes a bit more complex because then we have in this equation an ecosystem different stakeholders. So we start talking about internet service providers, or we start talking about social media companies, and then we start talking about even different spaces on the web or with technological developments that human rights start to become a bit more complex to understand where to draw the lines in terms of protection, of prevention, of responsibilities or violations of human rights. But that's why it's very important as a way of answering this question is remember that all the existing protections and standards in international and regional human rights law apply to how we exercise our rights online. And this would be like my first answer to this first question. And when moving more forward into how digital rights connect with sexual and reproductive rights. So I think there are different ways in which we can see them, and I will try just to cover three very quickly in the time I have. So one is definitely concerning freedom of expression. So when we talk about freedom of expression, it has been widely recognized that everyone has the right to seek, to receive, and impart information of all kinds and by all means. And I highlight by all means, because this is where we talk about electronic means, ICTs, internet. So we're talking by all means includes all these technological devices and spaces that we are not using, not just to seek, but also to disseminate information. And this is exactly how it then can also connect to the issue of privacy. So when we talk about privacy, we're also talking about how exactly is the ecosystem and the services provided in a way that people, and in this case in particular, women or all the people that is interested in all these issues start accessing information and how privacy interacts with this. So for example, we have seen recently how the right to anonymity online has been very, very important in the discussion of being able to access to this type of information without being tracked or without retaliation, or whenever we are in context where states are trying to over-criminalize and over-persecute persons trying to access to this information. And this is how we connect privacy, freedom of information, and then right to information, which is a very, very important issue about not only the people having the access and the right to access to this information, but also it's about the right of the person to provide the information online. And whenever they want to have an opinion on this issue and how exactly, then we come to the issue of how the different stakeholders and the different providers are implementing their own practices. And this is how I would like to also move to the part of non-discrimination online. And when it connects with the issue of technology. There have been a lot of research on this. Well, I don't know if a lot, but I can assure there is evidence because I was involved in some of these projects. But when we talk about sexual health, in the case of indigenous communities or rural communities, we are talking also about access to the internet and access to the internet, access to technology and how to access this information. It's almost, and in some cases, it's like a lifesaver or an information saver, and how this connects exactly on the right that people have, women have, to make informed decisions about their sexual and reproductive rights. So I can see like these different human rights that we already know, and I'm sure, I mean, a lot of experts and a lot of litigators and a lot of people are challenging at international and national level, and how to ensure that the protections that exist already are applied to these intersections with technology. And then trying to focus a bit more when we talk about restrictions. So I was talking about protection and how technology interacts with existing protections. But when we talk about restrictions of these rights, I will try to focus very briefly on the right to access to information and restrictions on the basis of sexual and reproductive related information. And I actually like the concept that you shared about talking about sexual and reproductive expression, because it's beautiful. But talking about restrictions, this is when we see, so we have the state that plays a role having regulatory frameworks, and the problem that we are seeing in many countries that I'm sure others here will talk about is the intersection when they are definitely having blocking orders. And we need to see these blocking orders not only from the side of restricting information as a whole, but also as a freedom of expression restriction. And when we treat it like that, then we are talking about the three-part test, that the freedom of expression is the only way that states are allowed to impose restrictions on expression. And what we can see is that states, first, they have this regulatory framework that is granting powers to some authorities to order these blocking restraint orders. They are sending it to service providers, they are sending it to social media platforms, but from the perspective of permissible restrictions, they are not complying with the legality test, for example. So there's not a court involved in the process, or they are not being very specific on the categories of content that they could be restricting. And then there is case law on these issues, not exactly on sexual and reproductive health, but on restrictions online on the basis of freedom of expression and blocking orders, but have said that whenever we talk about wholesale blockings, or that ISPs also go and block all the content of the website, this is an interference with freedom of expression, and it's highly likely that it will be arbitrary under the discretionary powers of states. And that's why the principle of legality is so important. And then this connects also with the principle of necessity that needs to be hand in hand with the legality test. When we talk about they are blocking the whole content, in a way, or de facto, they are assuming that all the content is illegal. And they are not making this differentiation between, there may be some educative content there. There may be some prevention content there. There may be some, in the case of sexual reproductive health information, right? So they are not making this assessment because they are not seeing it as a freedom of expression restriction. And that's why it's so important to see it as this, as a complete and important connection between these rights. And also when we involve the ISPs, the internet service providers, or the social media platforms, we can see that they are not following also these standards, or they are not following these assessments. They are just trying to avoid restrictions, sanctions from the authorities, and many other things. And I think that's why it's so important, the work that Women's Links, Women on Web, and all the lawyers that work with these groups and communities, like bringing these cases and to ensure that the protections that we have and the principle that is recognized, you know, that the rights that are protected offline should also be protected offline to be protected online. And I will close with this, hoping I did the time properly, and I will be very happy for more questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paulina. That was so rich, and I think there's so much there to go back to. It's perfect, I think, to turn to Yaman, and I want to ask you, because you really have incredible experience, I think, in developing some of the leading legal standards we have in Europe on this issue. And I wanted to ask you about developing legal strategies against attacks of freedom of expression, and what you think works best to protect what Women's Link is calling reproductive freedom of expression. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me, and good to see you all. And for over 2 years, we have been involved with 2 specific cases for both Women on Waves and Women on Web. Both websites are blocked from Turkey. I completely agree with everything Paulina said, and our association also very closely works on these issues with Article 19 Turkey team. So I will try to tell you a little bit about the Turkey related cases and also what I believe about freedom of expression. So first of all, of course, access to information is critical to everyone, and in particular, of course, to women when sexual and reproductive rights are concerned. And I believe this lies at the core of the right to freedom of opinion and expression. And therefore, reproductive rights are undoubtedly human rights, and restrictions on information and ideas on sexual and reproductive rights are not compatible with Article 10 of the Convention and amounts to censorship, whether it is on the internet or on the territorial waters of a state such as Portugal, as the European Court of Human Rights held in Women on Waves and others versus Portugal case. And also, I would like to remind you that there was a joint declaration on freedom of expression and gender justice published on the 3rd of May by the various UN special rapporteurs, the representative on freedom of the media of the OSCE, and they stated in their joint declaration that states should facilitate access to information and ideas of all kinds by and about women, including on sexual and reproductive health. So these are important statements towards the recognition of reproductive rights as within the concept of freedom of expression. On the other hand, unfortunately, I'm dealing with a lot of restrictions on access to information since I moved back to Turkey in 2009. As of today, over 600,000 websites are blocked from Turkey, and Women on Web and Women on Waves are just two of these blocked websites. Turkey also persistently blocks access to over 150,000 URL individual internet addresses, over 8,000 Twitter accounts, 50,000 tweets, 12,000 YouTube videos, and so on as of end of 2021. And since we launched our website for our association in December 2020, we also started to receive 12 separate blocking decisions involving announcements of blocking decisions, because we're trying to make internet censorship transparent in Turkey, so we often get blocked. And also, as an association, so far in the last 5 years or so, we appealed against over 350 plus blocking decisions, and equally lodged similar number of individual applications with the Constitutional Court. We were successful with Twitter, YouTube, and Wikipedia, but of course, they were high-profile cases, and everyone is interested with those cases. So the Constitutional Court was swift in terms of deciding those cases. We realized that Women on Waves was first blocked in April 2017, and then we noticed that Women on Web's website was blocked in June 2019. And we were in touch with both organizations in early 2020, and we started legal action around July 2020 for both websites, two separate legal actions, still going through the administrative course in Turkey, because both websites were blocked by the pharmaceutical and by the Ministry of Health and by an order of the Ministry of Health. So it was, for example, the Women on website was included among 176 other websites in a 2-page blocking decision, and there was no reasoning in that decision. But when you look at the other websites blocked with the same decision, Women on Web website was treated like a Viagra selling website or other drugs selling websites. So it did not make any differentiation in terms of the content of the website. So when we started the litigation, of course, in our submitted petitions, we explained that lack of facilitating policies in Turkey on issues such as birth control, sexual health, and especially on abortion, and the significance of the provision of such information through the Women on Web and Women on Waves websites, and their role to eliminate these disadvantages that constitute an important barrier to women's equal access to the right to health, as well as the importance of the provision of access to reliable and accurate information. We even highlighted the importance of the provision of such information during the COVID-19 pandemic in our applications. But what the Ministry of Health and the Turkish Medicine and Medical Devices Agency, that was also part of the litigation, they came back and cited misoprostol, and as if Women on Web website was selling misoprostol from the website. So the litigation is still ongoing. We constantly and every time cite various UN policies, international documentations on our website. We often refer, of course, not only to the Constitutional Court's decisions, but to the European Court's decisions on these important topics. But so far we have not been successful. But as my colleagues know, we weren't expecting to be successful with these cases. So that is why we're involved with these cases. It's not about winning these cases, but trying to obviously raise awareness through the litigation, and also ultimately to take these cases first to the Constitutional Court of Turkey. And if that is not successful, then taking the case obviously to the European Court of Human Rights. But in terms of developing legal strategies, obviously litigation through the courts take a lot of time. And even though we have the capability and capacity to pursue these cases through the courts, the Constitutional Court as well as the European Court, the websites in question, both Women on Web and Women on Waves, remain blocked during the duration of our legal efforts, while access to such information remains vital. So I think it is time to consider certain alternative tactics in addition to legal litigation. For example, by way of example, Sendika.org, an anti-government news website, was blocked 63 times from Turkey, because each time the website was blocked, it changed the domain name. But the subsequent domain names are also blocked. Similarly, Jin News, which we are also representing, is a Kurdish women-only reporters news website, and it has so far been blocked 50 times and constantly under threat of further access blocking decisions. We have launched several applications with the Constitutional Court on their behalf, and we are about to take their case to the European Court, even though the Constitutional Court has yet to decide. We will be arguing that the Turkish legal system does not provide an effective legal remedy, and the delays cause continuous violation and censorship of the website. So aggressive tactics involving alternative websites may be necessary, in addition to, of course, sharing information through the social media websites. We also perhaps need to publicize further these blocking cases and raise awareness with relevant UN and other international bodies and committees, as well as the special rapporteurs, representatives, and human rights commissioners. So that's why I think this meeting is very important to start that process. And that's what I would like to say so far. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yaman. And I'm not sure I heard correctly, but did you say your organization has made 350 challenges in 2 years so far? In relation to various other blocking decisions, yes, not in relation to only Women on Waves and Women on Web. So, yeah, but I mean, work.
Yes, it is. We have a young team of lawyers. We have 8 lawyers and 16 persons working in our association. So we are persistently challenging these decisions and to compel the Constitutional Court to decide. And if not, we are taking cases to the European Court of Human Rights. For example, we recently took a case involving access blocking to the Charlie Hebdo website from Turkey. And we're challenging almost all Kurdish news websites related blocking decisions. And Jin News is a very specific website that we are handling at the moment.
Thank you so much. And I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions and everyone's going to want to come in and ask more. I certainly want to know more. I'm going to move on and ask Aintzane as well to tell us more about website blocking as well in relation to sexual and reproductive rights and what happens and what it means when this happens. Thank you so much, Aintzane.
Thank you, Keina, very much for being with us today. I'm also very excited to be sharing this space with Paulina and Venny and Yaman and with the audience. And I think that Gema already explained who we are, but I just wanted to add that we identify national contexts that are ripe for using the law to bring about a structural change. And our cases are platforms. As Yaman was saying, it's doing beyond litigation. We use these cases to amplify our fight for equality and justice, and we hope that activists do the same with these cases. So we share our framework, we share our tools with other organizations, and we allow for greater collaboration and strengthening of the sector. So I believe that for these reasons, or I want to believe that for these reasons, when unfortunately in 2020, the Women on Web website was blocked in Spain, Women on Web contacted us. And since then, we are representing them in the courts against also the Spanish Agency of Medicine. So the case is very similar to the Turkish case. And well, the reasoning behind this blocking is again very similar to the Turkish case. They are saying that Women on Web is giving access to medical abortion. They argue that Women on Web is selling abortion pills online without a prescription, which is against Spanish law, although there is no evidence at all that Women on Web is shipping pills to Spain because primarily they provide information on sexual and reproductive rights to people that contact them from Spain. I'm sure that Venny will explain later on what they do much better than me. But I want to, of course, emphasize that, as Paulina was saying, this case, we are saying that there has been a violation of Women on Web's freedom of expression. More concretely, we have focused on how this violation is related to their right to provide information on the internet on reproductive rights. But we are also using the case not only to unblock Women on Web's website, but also to use it as a platform. As I was saying at the beginning, we are trying to call attention to the obstacles faced in Spain when attempting to access abortion services. And we also are trying to draw attention on how important it is that people can access accurate information on sexual and reproductive rights and access to abortion as a means to avoid obstacles. So although I'm going to explain briefly what is the status of the case, I want to focus on what are the impacts that we are seeing on the rights of women and girls and people that can't get pregnant, and also what are the states, or what should the states and governments, particularly the Spanish government, do to enable access to accurate information on reproductive health online. So with that goal in mind, first and foremost, I would like to say briefly that with regards to access on information on abortion in Spain, there is a huge importance of both work because there isn't enough information. Going back, abortion in Spain is legal. It's legal upon request up to 14 weeks of pregnancy, and then at later stage in cases of risks to the women's of person's life or severe fetal anomalies. But what we have seen is that are still a lot of barriers preventing people from accessing abortion without discrimination. Some of these barriers have to do with legal barriers and some others have to do with practical barriers. And one of these practical barriers that we have seen as part of our work in Spain is that there is a huge gap regarding the production and the dissemination of public and official information on how to access abortion services. So the main sources of information would be the internet, of course, then public health centers, which do not directly provide abortions, except from some centers in Catalonia, which is in the northeastern part of Spain, because in Spain, abortions are mostly done at private clinics and paid by the national health system. So the other source of information would be these private clinics, which give abortion services to those patients that are referred from the health system, and others that if they want, they can go privately and pay for the service themselves. What does this mean? That at the end, we are in a situation where there is very little public and institutional information regarding the process to access abortion in Spain, and the little information that there is, it's incomplete or is inconsistent nationwide. So there is different information available in each region. In some of these public health centers, women are provided with information. In others, they are provided with misinformation, which is also a huge problem. An example of this would be that 10 years after the current abortion law, the Spanish government has still not launched an official campaign to inform citizens about their reproductive rights. And in the meantime, they have carried out more than 80 campaigns about other medical issues. So what is the role of women on web in Spain? Of course, in this context, the WOW's website played a key and important role offering information on abortion services that the Spanish authorities have not provided for years. And that is the main reason that we understand that WOW's work in Spain is fundamental, because they supplement the inaction of public authorities with regards to access to information on abortion. Now, people in Spain cannot count on the help of WOW, unfortunately, and this has a huge impact on those people in more vulnerable situations. So for instance, we know that before the blocking of the website, there were a lot of undocumented migrant people that were contacting WOW through their website, and the blocking of the website has had a huge impact on them, because even though the Spanish law on abortion states that access to abortion should be granted without discrimination, the reality is that since 2012, migrants without a residence permit in Spain are de facto prevented from accessing abortion services because there is a very confusing and hyper-bureaucratic process that renders them unprotected. So these processes, of course, cause serious delays and, as a consequence, even the denial of access to the service. So what does this mean? What other rights are being violated? So we are trying in the legal proceedings, not only arguing that there is a violations of women on web's rights, but we are also arguing that because of the blocking of the website, there is a violation of women and people who can get pregnant, violation of the right to have access to information without discrimination. And of course, in addition to that, we are also saying that other rights of potential WOW users are being violated, namely the right to personal autonomy, the right to physical and moral integrity, the right to respect for family life, and the right to health. And concerning the right to access information and the right to health, we have made an special emphasis on these rights in connection to the right to access to scientific progress. I know this right is regulated under the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, and there isn't an equivalent under Spanish law, but we always try in our cases to push for national courts to interpret the law following international standards, and that is what we are doing in this case. We have highlighted how the availability of scientific information about health services on known and accessible platforms, such as WOW's platform, is fundamental for women and people who can get pregnant to be able to make autonomous and informed decisions about their sexual and reproductive health. And this is key also because the blocking of the website is happening in a national context of misinformation regarding access to abortion. Well, this is happening in Spain, but it's happening worldwide. And also we are in the middle of a global context of harassment, violence, and intimidation against reproductive activists, against healthcare providers, and women and people in need of abortion or who have undergone an abortion. That being said, the status of the case is before the Supreme Court. We are pending a decision on the merits, and all the previous judicial decisions have considered that the blocking of the website was justified for the reasons I was explaining at the beginning. However, we are optimistic because we are optimistic by nature, I think, but also because the Supreme Court has already stated that the issue at stake is relevant beyond the specific case because of the impact it can have on online service platforms and freedom of expression. So indeed, we think and we hope and we understand that the case will set a very important legal precedent that illustrates how access to information encompassing the right to seek, the right to receive, and the right to distribute information on health issues is a key determinant of access to abortion. I want to conclude just by saying that human organizations such as WOW strive to provide reliable and accurate information through their websites so that users know their rights, are not exposed to misinformation, barriers to access, unsafe abortions, or forced motherhood. And we strongly believe that this is the case of Women on Web, not only in Spain, but worldwide. And in Spain, we know that they play such an important informative role that, as I was saying before, the Spanish government has failed to fulfill for years. So their case, unfortunately, is a clear example on how attacks on digital rights, especially the free flow of information online, are connected to reproductive rights. And within that, censoring a website with information on sexual and reproductive rights has a direct impact on women and girls. And instead of censoring the website, the Spanish government should be more concerned about guaranteeing access to accurate, verifiable, scientific, and comprehensive information on abortion, and also on taking measures to counter disinformation online concerning sexual and reproductive rights. Hopefully, through the courts, with these cases, with the cases that Yaman is litigating, we hope that we can ensure a legal precedent that reinforces the right of all people to have access to information they need about sexual and reproductive health. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Aintzane. And just to sort of follow up, can I ask, what stage is the case in the proceedings? Is it pending before the Supreme Court, or where is it?
It's pending before the Supreme Court. They have decided to decide on the merits, which is kind of not normal, because they normally say, okay, we are going to admit the case, and if you want to go to the Constitutional Court, do it. But now that's why we are optimistic, because they have decided at least that they are going to make a decision on the merits. So that's where we are at the moment.
And if you win the case, that's it. And if you were to lose the case, do you appeal to the Constitutional Court? Is that how it works in your system, or?
That's right. If we win the case with all that we are asking, not only like the unblocking of the website, but also recognizing that there has been a violation of WOW's rights, then that's it. And if not, we can go to the Constitutional Court. And then if not, we would go to the European Court of Human Rights.
Thank you so much. So I think for loads of us, and some of us in common law systems as well, where we don't always have constitutional courts, it's always good to know where we are in terms of Supreme Court and Constitutional Court. I'm going to turn to Venny, who is the Executive Director of Women on Web, who we've been hearing so much about in the last while. And I have a specific question for her, but perhaps before answering that specific question, you'd like to take some minutes to talk about what WOW is and what WOW does. I think just to clarify for the people listening who might not know Women on Web and your work. And then the second question I'd like you to answer today is, how has the last 2 years of the pandemic affected the service and advocacy at WOW and other digital services as well? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question, and thank you for Women's Link to creating this space for us. I'm really excited and honored to be with all of you here today. So I'll start by explaining a little bit what Women on Web is, especially for those who don't know us that well. So Women on Web is an international telemedicine abortion service. We provide access to safe medical abortions through our website. So broadly speaking, anybody with an unwanted pregnancy can come onto our website, they can do an online consultation for abortion care. That consultation is then reviewed by a medical team. If they don't see that there's any reason for the person not to have a medical abortion safely, they provide a prescription. That prescription is then filled in a network of international vetted pharmacies that we work with, and then those pharmacies mail those medicines to people's home addresses. But also what our website does, it's a resource for information, unbiased information on abortions, medical abortions specifically, and what options people have in terms of managing their sexual and reproductive health. We have a team of doctors supporting the service, but I think like really the heart of the organization is our 25 help desk members working in 16 different languages, providing information over email to people during, before, and after abortions. And now we've been almost operating for 17 years. We've provided over 100,000 safe medical abortion services, and our help desk team has responded to over 1 million messages. And at the moment, the help desk team is answering about 10,000 messages per month around the world. I think I'll go on to the next question you have, because it's kind of bridges over to what I was about to tell us more about our service. Is that, of course, 17 years ago when we started, the whole concept of telemedicine and having access to abortions remotely was very controversial or even unique. But I think the last 2 years of the pandemic has really been very transformational for Women on Web, as well as for all kinds of digital services. The 2 years have increased, of course, need and demand for digital services. It really pushed those services into the mainstream. And I think what's really specific about abortions as well, that it's started to create really positive narratives around managing your own abortions or doing abortions outside sort of these traditional health structures. For example, at Women on Web, we started right away seeing an increase of requests to our service when the pandemic started. We knew that people had to self-isolate, people couldn't travel anymore. Services were also deprioritized in sexual and reproductive health services. So all those measures were really pushing people to use our service and digital services because they needed no physical contact. You don't need to leave your home. And internet also provides an increased privacy and anonymity for people for all kinds of reasons, but especially that's quite important for when accessing abortions. We published research as well on this. We started seeing specifically the countries that usually people would have to travel abroad to access abortions, they were turning to us. But then we also saw a totally opposite kind of a trend from places like the UK, where they quickly implemented telemedicine. The request to our service pretty much vanished. And what they were able to do, they were not only able to maintain access, but they were actually improving access. So again, they were able to respond to the needs of increased privacy, anonymity, and just simply making the service more convenient. The pandemic itself has of course had a devastating impact on the world itself. And I don't want to ignore the fact that the pandemic was also used as a pretext to roll back sexual and reproductive health services. We've also had countries like Poland basically outlawing abortions during the pandemic. But at the same time, there has been a silver lining to it, because it's really pushed the digital services into the mainstream, and it continues to push providers to sort of explore alternatives to in-clinic services. And I find that the connection between digital rights and sexual and reproductive rights, it's becoming more and more accessible to sort of mainstream audiences and also to abortion providers. But internet, like in general, like it's provided so much opportunities for women on web in a number of ways. It's really enabled us to working in the digital space has really enabled us to break some barriers to abortions, just like the pandemic showed. It's also enabled us to reframe what abortion access looks like. Like I said, 17 years ago, it was, for many people, it was kind of unimaginable to think that people could access abortions remotely, manage their own abortions at home without being supervised by doctors. Well, today we're seeing that these kind of services are actually becoming a permanent part of healthcare in countries like the UK, France, and the US, to name a few. And the internet has really also enabled us to challenge hierarchies and traditional power relationships between providers and patients. So sort of one person giving the information, the other person only receiving, because information on the internet is just available in a lot less hierarchical fashion, and people are able to seek the information that they need and become more like active agents in their own sexual and reproductive health management. And allowing them to seek information that they need, then to self-assess and self-manage their own abortion. So really, for us as well, like as Women on Web, we're able to then really put the power and the pills back into the hands of the women and pregnant people, who can then decide where they want to have their abortions and who they want to be with when they go through the process. And I think internet has also enabled us, I like to say, we've enabled us to provide feminist abortions. We've been able to run a service that really centers around the self-determination, the bodily autonomy and privacy of individuals, and really empowering individuals to make independent decisions about their health, their future, and their well-being. And I like to say that here, like at Women Are Web, we trust the women, we trust science, and we trust the abortion pill, and that's what it is. Internet, of course, has also, for us and in general for abortion services, has enabled to expand access. It's enabled participation for those who are traditionally prevented from accessing services and participating in public spheres because of certain social norms or cultural norms. And for us at Women on Web, it's really enabled us to reach some of the most remote regions in the world, for example, in the Middle East. And I've said it already, but internet really increases the privacy and anonymity of people using our services, and therefore we've been able to sometimes meet the needs of individuals better than the traditional health systems. And sometimes our service has replaced those systems altogether because access to abortions wouldn't have existed otherwise. We always talk about that there's these push and pull factors, people using our service. So a push factor would be like a person who has no access at all. There's maybe prohibitive cost around abortions, pushing them to use digital services like ours. And there's also, we're seeing an increase of these pull factors. So people are starting to, especially during the pandemic, now starting to express a strong preference to use services remotely, simply because it's just more convenient and private. But I would still say that both factors, the push and pull, are really relevant for us. It's not just about preference. I think the pandemic and more recently the war in Ukraine has really showed that what kind of a critical role telemedicine and self-managed abortions can have in crisis context, during a crisis, during a time when health infrastructure is at risk of collapsing or has collapsed, when people are forced into really precarious situations, their choices have been taken away and priorities are shifting really fast. So for example, currently in Poland, where we've been operating for many, many years now, we are receiving up to 5 requests from Ukrainian refugees needing to access abortions. And we've been able to have a response there precisely because of the way we work in the digital space. We've been able to quickly translate our resource into Ukrainian, making sure that people have easy access to the service. And we've been able to provide free and private and safe abortion access in Poland, which is otherwise known for its anti-abortion laws. And it's also helped us to fight misinformation. There's a lot of aggressive anti-abortion groups currently operating in Poland. So we've been able to put different narratives into that space and making sure that Ukrainian refugees know that there are options available. And it's actually under the Polish law, if you are in possession of abortion pills or self-managing abortion, you're actually not committing a crime under the Polish law. So it's really enabled us to raise awareness and make sure that people know what their rights are and what the options are for them. I think I'm just going to wrap up by also talking a little bit about what kind of challenges there still are. I've talked a lot about what opportunities there are. I think and somebody already teased it out in this conversation, is that internet and digital tools they're not just strategies that we deploy as abortion providers or others. Internet is really an extension of our offline lives. And it's extremely critical that people stay connected in times of crisis, like during the pandemic or now during the war in Ukraine. And similarly, just like sexual and reproductive rights are vulnerable offline, they are vulnerable online too. So actually just 2 weeks ago, we learned that we are blocked now in Malta in some of the governmental work networks, which actually makes Malta as the 7th country that's now blocked Women on Web websites. And that's really all they're doing. They're just blocking our website. People are still going to be having abortions. It just means that they're going to be pushed to black markets, to do abortions in unsafe ways. And it's exposing people to these information vacuums, because the moment our website is out, it's quickly going to be taken over by anti-abortion websites and rhetoric, misleading people again about their rights and options. And yeah, internet is, we see that internet, it's providing a lot of opportunities, but it's also becoming more and more closed and regulated space, very different than what it was 17 years ago. But at the same time, all of us, we're moving onto the internet to seek more information and access sexual reproductive services. So I just want to underscore how important it is to consider digital rights in sexual and reproductive health programming. It shouldn't be just an afterthought, because by protecting digital rights, privacy, and the content, we actually are also protecting abortion rights and access to. I think I'm going to stop there, but happy to answer kind of questions that the audience might have. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Venny. I'm going to ask you one short follow-up question, and then ask you directly a question from someone in the audience, because I think it follows very nicely to what you were saying. And my first question is, so 7 countries have blocked WoW at the moment, and I was wondering just about the timeline. Are these all quite recent? Is this a recent phenomenon? I mean, you've been operating for 17 years, and is this sort of a new strategy and a new challenge that you're facing? Yeah, I don't know if you want to answer that first.
Yeah, it's not recent, but I would have to say that it's kind of intensified also during the pandemic. So a lot of those websites that have recently been blocked, actually, has happened in the last 2 years. So Yaman was saying that the Women on Waves website, I think, was blocked first time 2017. But then actually during the pandemic, so that was 2020 October, one of our sibling sites, or mirror websites that we usually put up when we're censored, also got blocked. Then, of course, the case in Spain, now Malta. So I would say it's been for some years now that this has been going on. It's intensified, and then we've also sort of intensified our efforts in terms of pursuing legal action and realizing that we cannot just be reactive and continue to push those mirror websites online to make sure that, of course, the people have alternative access to our service, but we're also proactively challenging these decisions and raising awareness that what kind of harm that censorship causes.
Thank you so much. And the next question is from Leah Lauvasser, who's asked a great question, I think, that many of us are wondering about, which is what is happening with the access of Ukrainian refugee women who are moving to Poland, and is sexual and reproductive health information still accessible?
It's quite difficult, of course. So actually, back in the day, before the war, Polish people would go to Ukraine to access abortions. Now Ukrainian refugees are arriving in high numbers in Poland, and Poland, like I said earlier, it's known for its anti-abortion laws. So you can access legal abortions only in 3 cases: if it's been if you've been raped, if it's a case of incest, or if the pregnancy is posing a danger to the woman's health. So it is extremely difficult to access legal abortions there, even also even in the case of rape. So you would need to open up a criminal investigation with the local authorities to prove that you're a victim of sexual violence. This is near to impossible for Polish people, not to mention to refugees. So what we've been doing as Women on Web and with our local partners, we've been really invested in just raising awareness that options do exist, and the feminist community in Poland has stepped in to provide services and refer cases to us, for example. So there's not a lot of options there, but there are options like Women on Web and similar services still providing medical abortions.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to go ahead and start fielding questions to different people, because there's quite a lot of questions now coming in. And Aintzane, there's a question for you on the Supreme Court case that you were talking about on the banning of, or the blocking of the WoW website. And the question is, if the Supreme Court in Spain were to rule in favor of WoW, what would happen?
Thank you, Keina, for the question. Well, whoever did the question, sorry. Yeah, well, for sure, the first thing that we will ask is the lifting of the blocking of the website. And secondly, I think that as we do with all our cases, we will use it as a platform to advocate for access to information on sexual and reproductive health. I think that in the event that this is the decision that the Supreme Court comes to, it's a precedent that can be used in the region in general, right? And also I think that it could be an opportunity for the government to consider the role in telemedicine and how can telemedicine be a tool to overcome obstacles on accessing abortion. In fact, there is a proposal ongoing on modifying the law in Spain. So I think that it's also an opportunity. And if the case would be that the court finally decided on favor of women on web, well, I don't think why they cannot use it as an opportunity to do that, because in fact, during the pandemic also in Catalonia, in some places, there was the possibility on accessing abortion through telemedicine. So I think, and I hope that that's the scenario that we can talk about in the coming weeks or months, probably months.
Thank you so much. And I think, Yaman, this question is related, and I think it's for you, which is that what happens when these websites are blocked, and where can people then get their information on about abortion? We heard Aintzane talk earlier a little bit about the lack of information in other parts. We also heard Venny talk about sort of lots of information on the internet, but I was just wondering about what happens when a website like WO is blocked, and how can people then access accurate information?
Well, from a Turkish context, because of the high number of websites blocked from Turkey, Turkish users are very much experienced. I would say since 2008, when YouTube was blocked for almost 2 years, people were capable of changing their DNS numbers. At that time, it was much easier. And since 2014, I would say, when the government blocked both Twitter and YouTube, and in 2017, when access to Wikipedia platform was blocked for almost 2.5 years, people started to learn very quickly how to use VPN technology. But the problem now is that the Turkish authorities are also blocking high number of well-known foreign VPN services, primarily US ones, but others. There are still, of course, those which are not blocked from Turkey, but it's like a cat and mouse game in Turkey. But somehow, obviously, those who are seeking reliable information, we know that manage to reach Women on Web website, but because they can reach them through the social media platforms as well. But also we know in our experience that some users are scared to access officially blocked websites from Turkey. That's also an issue, not perhaps with the younger generation, but with the older generation. We get often questions in terms of whether it's illegal to access a blocked website, for example. There's no such crime in Turkey, but people always wonder. In terms of the stage of the case, I forgot to mention, we reached the highest administrative court, Council of State, or Conseil d'État. That's the highest administrative court, in December 2021. So it will at least take a year to 18 months. But we're not only asking the Council of State to overturn these blocking decisions, but we also asked, which is a difficult issue, but we asked the Council of State to refer the cases to the Constitutional Court, because we are arguing that the legal provision given to the health authority is unconstitutional and breaches Article 26 of the Constitution, which is about freedom of expression. So we don't know if the Council of State will refer the case to the Constitutional Court, But if not, if they reject our appeals, then the next stage for us would be to take the cases by way of individual application to the Constitutional Court. But that means another 3-4 years of waiting, but again, that's why we established the association, and we're trying to obviously maintain the association. And I can tell you that the government authorities are not very pleased with our efforts in terms of trying to make censorship more transparent in Turkey through our sharing of decisions and through our litigation. But that's what we try to do, basically. And somebody needs to do it, basically.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask, there's a lot of questions coming in, so I will try and ask all your questions, but you will have to forgive me if I don't. Paulina, I wanted to ask you a question, because we've been hearing a lot about the term sort of misinformation and accurate information, inaccurate information. And the question is that, are there experiences of successful legal strategies to tackle the spread of misinformation using a freedom of information framework?
This is a great question, because unfortunately, from the work we have done, and in particular in the context of the pandemic, the only legal responses we have seen are just restrictive, are all around the world, and even using disinformation, fake news, and many other terminology in laws, trying to restrict information about health, information about human rights defenders, journalistic content. So it's very hard to start with a negative stance to answer this question. But the important thing to say, maybe I have two points that can maybe help us start bringing these two frameworks together and try to find some ways of addressing them, because it's difficult to talk about a solution when we talk about disinformation. And as I was saying at the beginning, when we talk about technology and internet, so we're talking about different layers and different actors involved in all the infrastructure level and the content level. So as I was listening, Venny and Aintzane talking about the misinformation campaigns in the context of sexual and reproductive rights. So it's important to if we see it from a freedom of expression lens, we can say that there is maybe a possible space for states to start looking at responses based on the harm and the risks that some types of information are putting in individuals and in groups. So for example, if there is a lot of information circulating about the impacts of one medicine that will kill you, or that certain groups are providing you with false information and they have killed XYZ number of people. So this is a very particular content that can be assessed in the terms of, okay, so maybe this type of information is putting women at risk. And in this case, we can try to explore what are the legal responses that can help. So for example, if in this time we are trying to look for social media companies, so we know that they are very inconsistent and transparent on how they have been dealing with disinformation or misinformation. And so we can find like one layer there, which is not more a lot about legal responses, but then we have also the layer under which you have the states trying to publicize and to be more proactive on saying, look, there is this campaign, it's damaging people's, please, and then just try to bring these narratives. As Venny was saying, like the counter narratives have become a very good measure to address this issue. But unfortunately, we also need to think about the business models of the companies, which are certainly the way and how this information just proliferate and replicate in different contexts when we don't have the conditions to replicate and to respond and to counter these narratives. So for me, it's like talking about disinformation or misinformation is important to see it from the scope of what exactly it can be causing for these groups, and look at what are exactly the spaces of legal response we want to give the state, because it can be very dangerous just to call for absolute restrictions in a context of misinformation. And actually, there is a report from the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Expression that was in 2021, if I remember correctly, covering a lot of these issues. They didn't cover a lot of sexual and reproductive rights, but this is definitely an angle that I'm sure the Special Rapporteur is very interested in, as she has been pushing for a feminist and women's rights perspective in the mandate.
Thank you so much, Paulina. Yes, she talks about gendered censorship, doesn't she? And we've heard a lot about that today. There are a lot of questions for Venny coming in. And I think this one leads on to what Paulina was talking about, because we've been hearing about the blocking of websites, but the one question that's come in is about restrictions on social media and about those distinctions. So restrictions on Facebook or YouTube. And the question is, how do you deal with that censorship on social media platforms? Is that something that WOA is still dealing with? And I don't know, Venny, if you want to answer that, or if that's, yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely. I think we could have a separate seminar on this topic. It's certainly been always there. It has intensified during the pandemic because simply human moderators are no longer working from home, no longer able to moderate the content. So robots are doing that on behalf of them. We're seeing our accounts being blocked all the time. At some point, the count was within a year, it was 10 or so of our accounts had been deactivated. And what it means to us is that we've had to pivot our teams to deal with these things. So we're in constant negotiations with, especially with Facebook, discussing appealing the decisions to deactivate our accounts. And sometimes the timing of those blockages has been really devastating for us. So one time it was our Polish language Instagram and Facebook accounts, they got deactivated just leading to the constitutional ruling around abortions. It took us 4 months to get those accounts back. So basically during a time when people needed access to information about the options, our accounts were blocked. We've also started to advertise on these platforms, and that's proven to be even more complicated. There's a lot of regulations around the keywords that we want to use. And I think it's also giving us an idea why our other posts get taken down on a regular basis. So it takes a lot of effort from us to keep pushing that information out, keeping the information online. We also never really understand why information is taken down. We'll never explain whether it was a flood of complaints about the post that we did. It was the algorithm. We never know. We have received sometimes responses from Facebook saying it was by mistake, but it's quite a harmful mistake if our accounts are out for 4 months or so. So it's definitely a big part of our sort of, when we talk about censorship and women on web, social media has become taken a big space there for sure.
Thank you so much. And I think this could be a completely different session again, talking about social media restrictions rather than blockages, which we've focused on today. And I just want to, before turning to Aintzane for my next question, there's a very quick question on what WOA's experience of telemedicine is in Latin America. Do you operate in Latin America?
In some countries, yes, not in all countries. So it's not just, it's for us to be able to operate, it's not just about having access to the internet and being able to access our service that way, but we also have some issues getting our services through to some countries. So currently we're quite active in Mexico and Chile, for example. And I think especially this year, we're looking at expanding a little bit more again, but we've had, historically speaking, we've had a strong presence there for many years, but it sort of comes and goes with different restrictions. And now, of course, a lot of countries that they're moving on to decriminalizing and decriminalized abortion. So that means also that we are positioning ourselves differently in those countries.
Thank you so much. I want to pick a slightly different question rather than on the information freedom of expression line of things. And I think an important question has come in about how we can practice a more intersectional approach to ensuring a broad range of reproductive rights and working towards reproductive justice in conjunction with other rights related to, for example, immigration. So I'm going to ask you that, Aintzane, because you mentioned earlier that migrant women in Spain have particular access problems.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the reality is that although the law states that access should be granted without discrimination, the fact that health competences are divided regionally, that means that in each region of Spain, access to abortion depends on local or regional health authorities. And in practice, there is a very, very complicated process that renders women and people that are undocumented with a lot of difficulties in accessing health. So that is an issue when it's related to abortion services because of the time that you have to have access to those processes, right? So I think that working on reproductive justice with an intersectional approach means considering the situations, for instance, of migrant people and the specific barriers that they face when they try to access abortion. And I think that there's a need to adapt the reality of what is being said in the law to how it's the service being provided regionally or locally. And again, I think that telemedicine can overcome some of these barriers because not everyone lives close to a clinic, or not everyone has access to the internet. That's another specific barrier. Okay, but telemedicine can be the solution to some of the problems and some of the problems that are faced by people that are not living in a city with access to money to pay for the private clinic that provides abortion. And I feel like that is what government should be doing, considering all the obstacles that different people face when accessing abortion.
Thank you so much, Aintzane. There's a related question, and I'm not sure if it's for you or for somebody else, but Patricia Vasquez has asked, what alternatives are available to people in rural areas or regions with low connectivity to bridge the digital divide and access telemedicine abortion services? And I might come to you, Paulina, because I think you talked about sexual health for Indigenous communities and the research that you've done there.
Of course. So unfortunately, I think it's difficult to talk about telemedicine for communities that have fairly access to electricity, for example. So when we are talking about from the perspective, like the broad one, that is information and access to it, and in particular, those information that is held by states. And when it connects with all the framework of obligations on the right to access to information. This is when we have seen some specific barriers in terms, for example, that governments are moving more into a digitalized operation, right? And these concerns, for example, one particular case that I can share is when some communities, they were said for years that they were going to have some sexual and reproductive units, health units in their communities. For years, but I think they spent like 5-6 years without them. So we use the right to access to information requests to know more about what happened with these units. And in the end, we found out that there was like a very big budget allocated to this, and it was reported that they were already built. So for them, it was, when we started these conversations with them and we started litigating a lot of things with them, it was about, they were a bit concerned about not only their lack to access to the internet, that it was maybe this the only way to request information to the states, but also how they had like some kind of fear to technology. Because we need to also see, when we talk about indigenous communities or rural communities, that their notion of technology might be very difficult from the one we have. Right, so they may feel uncomfortable using some devices that they had never used in their life. They may also find difficult to open an email account, and they may also be difficult just to access to the basic devices. And as I was saying, to the basic access to electricity, because in some cases you will find that the local schools have internet, so everyone knows go to the schools to connect to that internet. But the important thing about like how exactly can these communities access to telemedicine, I think it's about allowing these communities to decide if this is the way they want to get it. Because we need to first see if we can fill the gap of the information that has not been received from the beginning. right? So talking about digital rights, internet access, and communities in this situation in particular, it has been very important to see it from this multicultural idea that we cannot just assume that our notions will be the same as for them. So for me, it's like seeing it more comprehensively, like, okay, so look, there is telemedicine, but not seeing it as a solution if there are many other gaps and underlying issues that have not been addressed before.
Thank you so much, Paulina. I'm going to ask one last question before turning it over to Gema to wrap up. I think, Yaman, this is going to come to you, and it might be the most difficult that I'm leaving till last. But I think you've spoken about, something like 600,000 websites being blocked in Turkey, and all the different legal the litigation that's going on to block these websites. And a question has come in, which is, how can we as activists, human rights advocates and civil society ensure that we protect the sexual and reproductive health websites? And the person has said that litigation to lift these blockages are of course critical, but should we work closer with software developers or the technology sector to ensure that we have the skills to overcome this? And are there examples of such cooperation between sectors? Is that something you can help us with?
Yes, I mean, technology, as you know, technology works both ways. So, and has been one of the, the technology, the internet itself resists to censorship. That's why the internet was developed. And these mechanisms, such as blocking, are very crude technologies, and of course they can be beaten. But of course, as I mentioned earlier on, now, for example, in Turkey, authorities are blocking access to VPN technology, and the Turkish Telecom Authority has deep packet inspection technology. They have not used it yet for these purposes, but they're capable of throttling, which means slowing down access to websites and platforms. They did this in the past with WhatsApp, for example, when the former Russian ambassador a few years back was murdered in Ankara. We were not able to send any WhatsApp messages for over 36 hours. And with a recent amendment to internet law in July 2020, the Turkish authorities threatened social media platform providers. If they did not establish legal representation in Turkey, they were going to throttle their websites for up to 90%. That was the claim. So unfortunately, all the big social media platform providers rushed into establishing offices in Turkey. I mean, that hasn't been very successful for the Turkish authorities, but there are these tools on hand which are yet to be used. And also a lot of international associations are looking into complete internet shutdowns, which I need to mention as well. Access Now, for example, works in that field. So there are those dangers. But on the other hand, of course, there are companies and projects looking into ensuring that information remains accessible through the internet. Tor is a great example as a browser. Sometimes that gets even blocked from Turkey, but there are always different means of accessing. The important thing is to be able to continue the important work done by the likes of Women on Web. That's crucial. So they need to stay online, and we will figure out somehow to access their platforms. And so from our point of view, we need to exist with our association and continue to work. So that's what we concentrate, and leave the technology to the technologists, basically. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yaman. I am going to hand over to Gema to wrap up today. Unfortunately, we're not going to have time to ask and answer any more questions. But thank you all so much for attending. Thank you all so much for speaking. And yeah, over to you, Gema.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Keina, for your amazing job as a moderator and facilitator. And thank you, Aintzane, Paulina, Yaman, Venny, for everything you've shared and for being here with us today. Thank you, Martha, for the translation, and to everyone who has been behind the scenes, making sure that the technical aspects work. And yeah, I think I've found the discussions really interesting and important. And I think we're seeing how the challenges are global, are happening everywhere, and it makes us stronger, I believe, if we come together to share, our experiences of what the challenges are in different territories and geographies, but also what are the strategies that we're using that are working, and yeah, I think that's what my takeaway from today. Thank you very much to everyone who has been in attendance, and bye-bye.